Welcome to Dialogue Doodles, everyone. I'm Jack, and today we're diving into one of the most fascinating minds in philosophy, Søren Kierkegaard. With us is Professor James Anderson, an expert in existential philosophy and Kierkegaard's work. James, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be here to discuss Kierkegaard, especially since his insights feel more relevant than ever in our age of anxiety and endless choices.
You know, James, before we dive deep into Kierkegaard's philosophy, I've always been struck by how his personal life shaped his thinking. Here's someone who experienced such profound personal struggles, yet transformed them into revolutionary philosophical insights.
Absolutely. Kierkegaard's life was marked by what he called the thorn in the flesh, these intense personal experiences that became the foundation of his philosophy. His father's religious melancholy and his broken engagement with Regine Olsen were particularly influential.
Could you tell us more about his father's influence? I understand it was quite complex.
His father, Michael Kierkegaard, was a wealthy merchant who carried a deep sense of religious guilt. As a poor shepherd boy, he had once cursed God for his hardships. This haunted him throughout his life, and he passed this religious intensity on to his son Søren.
That's fascinating. How did this religious atmosphere at home affect young Kierkegaard's development?
It was profound. His father's melancholy and religious obsession created an atmosphere where young Søren learned to see existence through the lens of guilt, anxiety, and religious questioning. But importantly, it wasn't just negative, it gave him an incredible depth of psychological insight.
And then there's the famous broken engagement with Regine Olsen. Many consider this a turning point in his life.
Yes, the Regine affair was crucial. He was deeply in love with her, but broke off their engagement after about a year. He believed he couldn't reconcile his melancholic nature and his sense of religious calling with marriage.
The decision to break off the engagement seems almost paradoxical, sacrificing love for what he saw as a higher calling. Did this experience directly influence his philosophical work?
Enormously. After breaking the engagement, Kierkegaard entered his most productive period of writing. The experience became a living laboratory for his ideas about choice, faith, and what he would later call the stages of existence.
Their final encounter years later was quite poignant, wasn't it?
Yes, their last meeting in 1855 was deeply moving. Regine, by then married, simply said to him, "God bless you, may all go well with you." It was a moment that encapsulated themes of resignation, faith, and grace that Kierkegaard wrote about.
You mentioned the stages of existence. This is one of Kierkegaard's most influential ideas. How did his personal experiences shape this concept?
Well, Kierkegaard essentially lived through these stages himself. He saw how people, including himself, could move through different ways of existing, from seeking immediate pleasure to ethical commitment to religious faith.
Could you break down these stages for our listeners?
Of course. Kierkegaard identified three main stages: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. The aesthetic stage is focused on immediate pleasure and experience, living for the moment, you might say.
That sounds quite appealing at first glance. What's the catch?
The catch is that it ultimately leads to boredom and despair. Think of someone constantly seeking new experiences, new relationships, new sensations, but never finding lasting satisfaction. Kierkegaard called this the rotation method, constantly seeking variety to avoid boredom.
That feels remarkably relevant to our social media age, doesn't it?
Exactly. The endless scrolling, the constant search for the next dopamine hit, it's a perfect modern example of the aesthetic stage. Kierkegaard would recognize it immediately.
So what pushes someone to move beyond this stage?
Usually, it's a crisis or realization that this way of living is ultimately empty. This can lead to the ethical stage, where one embraces commitment and duty. Marriage was Kierkegaard's prime example, choosing to commit to one person rather than maintaining endless possibilities.
The ethical stage sounds more mature than the aesthetic, but I understand Kierkegaard didn't see it as the highest form of existence?
Right. While the ethical stage represents a significant advancement, taking on responsibility, making commitments, Kierkegaard believed there was something even beyond this, the religious stage.
And this is where things get really interesting, don't they? Because this isn't just about following religious rules.
Not at all. The religious stage involves what Kierkegaard famously called the leap of faith, a movement beyond rational understanding. His prime example was Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac. It's a paradox that can't be resolved through ethical reasoning alone.
That's quite challenging to grasp. How would you explain this to someone living in our modern, secular world?
Think of it this way: both the aesthetic and ethical stages operate within the realm of human understanding. The aesthetic person asks, "What do I want?" The ethical person asks, "What is my duty?" But the religious stage involves confronting something beyond human comprehension, what Kierkegaard calls the absolute relationship with the absolute.
I imagine this confrontation with something beyond our understanding can be quite anxiety-inducing.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of Kierkegaard's most profound insights, his understanding of anxiety. He saw anxiety not just as a negative emotion to be overcome, but as a fundamental aspect of human freedom.
That's fascinating. Anxiety as something potentially positive. Could you elaborate on that?
Kierkegaard described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. Unlike fear, which has a specific object, anxiety arises from the sheer possibility of choice. Standing at the edge of a cliff, you might feel anxious not because you're afraid of falling, but because you're aware you could choose to jump.
That's quite a vivid image, and I imagine this connects back to those moments of major life decisions we discussed earlier.
Precisely. Think about any major life choice: career changes, marriage, having children. The anxiety we feel isn't just fear of making the wrong choice, it's the dizzying awareness of our freedom to choose it all. This is what Kierkegaard would call the possibility of possibility.
You know, hearing this, I can't help but think about how this relates to modern anxiety disorders and our current mental health discussions.
It's a crucial connection. While Kierkegaard wasn't talking about anxiety disorders as we understand them today, his insights have deeply influenced modern psychological approaches. He was really the first to explore anxiety as something fundamentally different from fear.
Could you explain that distinction a bit more, between fear and anxiety?
Fear has a specific object: you're afraid of spiders, or public speaking, or failing an exam. But anxiety, as Kierkegaard saw it, is about the sheer openness of possibility itself. It's more existential.
I imagine this kind of anxiety might be even more relevant in our modern world where we have so many choices available to us.
Absolutely. Think about how many options young people face today: countless career paths, lifestyle choices, identity expressions. Kierkegaard would say this abundance of possibility naturally increases anxiety.
Is that why we sometimes find ourselves paralyzed by simple decisions, like choosing what to watch on Netflix?
Yes, that's a perfect modern example. What we call choice paralysis today, Kierkegaard would recognize as a manifestation of the dizziness of freedom. The more options we have, the more we confront the anxiety of possibility.
But Kierkegaard didn't see this anxiety as purely negative, did he?
Not at all. He saw it as potentially educational, even necessary for human development. Anxiety reveals our freedom to us. It's like a teacher, albeit an uncomfortable one, showing us the reality of our own existence.
That's quite profound. So how did he suggest we deal with this anxiety?
Well, he didn't believe we should try to eliminate it entirely. Instead, he suggested learning to live with it productively. It's about acknowledging the anxiety while not letting it paralyze us, using it as a guide to understanding ourselves better.
That sounds remarkably similar to some modern therapeutic approaches.
Exactly. Many current therapeutic methods, particularly existential therapy and aspects of mindfulness, echo Kierkegaard's insights. They focus on accepting anxiety as part of the human condition rather than seeing it as something to be eliminated.
It's fascinating how his personal struggles with anxiety and depression led to insights that still help people today.
Yes, and that's what makes Kierkegaard so remarkable. He transformed his own psychological struggles into profound philosophical insights that continue to resonate. He showed that our deepest personal challenges can lead to universal understanding.
James, as we discuss this interaction between anxiety and freedom, I can't help but think about how this relates back to the 3 stages of existence we discussed earlier.
That's a brilliant connection, Jack. Each transition between stages involves confronting anxiety. Moving from the aesthetic to the ethical stage, for instance, requires facing the anxiety of commitment.
And I imagine the leap to the religious stage involves the most anxiety of all.
Absolutely. That's where we face what Kierkegaard called infinite resignation, the willingness to give up everything for something that can't be rationally understood. Think about his decision with Regine giving up a finite love for what he saw as an infinite calling.
Do you think our modern world makes it harder or easier to make these kinds of transitions?
In many ways, it's harder. Our culture of instant gratification and constant distraction makes it easier than ever to remain in the aesthetic stage. Social media, for instance, provides an endless stream of novel experiences.
Yet paradoxically, we seem to be experiencing more anxiety than ever.
Yes, and Kierkegaard would likely say that's because we're trying to avoid the very anxiety that could lead to our growth. We scroll through social media to avoid facing our existential situation, but this avoidance only increases our underlying anxiety.
It's almost like we're trapped in what he would call the aesthetic stage.
Exactly. And the way out, according to Kierkegaard, isn't through finding more distractions or even through pure rational thinking, it's through embracing the anxiety and using it as a catalyst for personal transformation.
This brings together so many of Kierkegaard's insights: the stages of existence, the nature of anxiety, the importance of personal choice.
And that's what makes him so relevant today. His understanding of how personal struggle connects to universal human experiences helps us make sense of our own challenges.
If you had to distill Kierkegaard's message for someone struggling with anxiety or major life choices today, what would you say?
I'd say that your anxiety isn't just a problem to be solved, it's a sign that you're confronting the real possibilities of human existence. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety but to learn from it, to let it guide you toward more authentic ways of living.
And perhaps to recognize that everyone else is going through similar struggles.
Absolutely. Kierkegaard's genius was in showing that these deeply personal struggles are actually universal. We're all facing the dizziness of freedom, all trying to find authentic ways of existing.
It strikes me that there's something quite hopeful in Kierkegaard's philosophy, despite its reputation for being heavy or melancholic.
That's such an important point. While he doesn't offer easy answers, he shows us that our struggles have meaning. Even our anxiety can be a doorway to greater self-understanding and authentic living.
Looking back at where we started, with his personal struggles with his father and Regine, it's remarkable how he transformed those experiences into insights that still help people today.
Yes, and that's perhaps his greatest legacy. He showed how personal experience, when deeply examined, can reveal universal truths. His own journey through the stages of existence became a map for others to follow.
And speaking of following, what would you suggest as a first step for listeners who want to explore Kierkegaard's ideas further?
I'd suggest starting with self-reflection about your own life choices and anxieties. Ask yourself, am I living in the aesthetic stage, constantly seeking novelty? Am I ready for ethical commitments? What makes me anxious, and what might that anxiety be teaching me?
Those are powerful questions to sit with. Any specific readings you'd recommend?
Either /or is a fascinating exploration of the aesthetic and ethical stages. But for modern readers, the concept of anxiety might be most relevant. It speaks directly to our current struggles with choice and uncertainty.
James, this has been an incredibly rich discussion. We've covered so much ground, from Kierkegaard's personal struggles to his philosophical insights and their remarkable relevance to our modern lives.
Thank you, Jack. Kierkegaard once wrote that life must be lived forward but can only be understood backward. I hope our discussion helps listeners both understand their past experiences and live more authentically going forward.
That's a perfect note to end on. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of Kierkegaard's ideas. Remember, if you're feeling that dizziness of freedom, you're not alone. You're just experiencing what it means to be human.
And perhaps that anxiety you're feeling isn't just a burden, it might be the beginning of your own philosophical journey.
Thank you again, James, for sharing your expertise with us today. And to our listeners, until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and remember, sometimes the most difficult questions lead to the most meaningful insights. Before we wrap up completely, James, I'd love to explore one more aspect. How do you see Kierkegaard's ideas playing out in specific modern situations?
Well, take the current trend of quiet quitting or major career changes. Many people feel intense anxiety about these decisions, and Kierkegaard would see this as a potential moment of transition between stages.
Could you elaborate on that? How might Kierkegaard view someone struggling with a career crisis?
He might see someone moving from the aesthetic stage, perhaps pursuing a career for status or money, to the ethical stage, where they're seeking more meaningful work aligned with their values. The anxiety they feel isn't just about job security, it's about authentic self-expression.
And what about relationships in the digital age? Dating apps, for instance.
That's a fascinating example. Dating apps can keep people trapped in the aesthetic stage, endless swiping, always seeking the next best option. The anxiety about commitment becomes almost paralyzing when possibilities seem infinite.
So the move to actually choosing one person and committing would be a move toward the ethical stage.
Exactly. It's about embracing finitude, accepting that choosing one thing means giving up other possibilities. This is what makes love both terrifying and meaningful in Kierkegaard's view.
What about social media and the way we present ourselves online?
Kierkegaard would likely see our social media personas as forms of aesthetic existence, carefully curated images that avoid true self-confrontation. The challenge is moving beyond this to authentic self-expression.
And I imagine the anxiety of revealing our authentic selves online relates to his concepts.
Absolutely. The fear of being truly seen, of being vulnerable, this is part of what Kierkegaard calls the terror of transparency. But it's only through facing this terror that we can develop genuine connections.
These modern applications really show how ahead of his time Kierkegaard was.
Indeed. He understood that technological progress wouldn't solve our existential challenges. If anything, it might make them more acute by giving us more ways to avoid facing ourselves.
So the key is not to let these modern tools become ways of avoiding anxiety, but rather to use them while maintaining authentic engagement with life's fundamental questions.
Precisely. The challenge isn't to reject modern life but to live it authentically, to use technology while remaining aware of our deeper existential situation. It's about finding balance between convenience and genuine human experience.